Hello and welcome to another custom video. I'm Norva Ragnor and today I get to finally finish my Super Mario and Gears of War crossover custom figure line. Over the last few months I've turned Mario, Luigi and Peach into core soldiers, and I needed them to have a villain to go up against. I've already had to delay this custom figure due to a damaged locust figure, so after getting the replacement parts needed, I'm super excited to get this one started. And as seeing how both series villains are giant humanoid reptile-like creatures, Bowser being a giant turtle and Locust being giant lizard-like people, the two should blend brilliantly. So before something happens that causes another delay, let's get to it. First up is Bowser, the main antagonist of the Mario series. And I never realised how large this figure was, especially because the Mario and Luigi figures are only 4 inches tall. The figure is extremely bulky, and although it does have multiple points of articulation, due to how bulky this figure is, that articulation is also very limited. But the figure is great nonetheless. If you're a collector of Mario figures, you're not going to be disappointed about having this on your shelf. I will only need Bowser's head. I was toying with the idea of removing the shell on Bowser's back and attaching it to the custom figure, but decided against it. I may revisit this idea later on down the line, but for now I'll keep the shell on the Bowser figure. After my previous Grenadier body broke, I had to get a replacement, and I guess whoever this figure belonged to decided to make a custom Grenadier with a Pharaon helmet. This figure, much like all of NECA's work, is amazing. The details on this figure are awesome, but lacks articulation. The lower body of these Locust figures are very limited in their range of articulation, with most of the movement coming from the torso, and honestly that's my one gripe with these figures. NECA did a great job with the Gears line, other than missing out on some key characters, but I won't get into that here. I won't need the Pharaon head, so I'll be throwing that into my spare heads box, which seems to be getting bigger each month. Now it's time to remove the heads, using the same method I have done in all my videos. Boiling water, a couple of minutes, and presto. Headless corpse. Bowser being the bigger and bulkier of the two meant I had to get a bigger jug to drown the figure so I can ceremoniously rip his head off. I leave Bowser to his thoughts while his neck joint softens up in the boiling water. I wonder what goes through his head.
Gonna fuck you.
Well damn, maybe I should have put him in cold water. And now we have a Bowser head for mounting. Mario will be pleased. Due to Bowser's head being soaked in hot water for a little longer than planned, one of the horns came loose. An easy fix, so not to worry. No need to delay. Again. And I also need to fix this imperfection. Using some super glue, I attached the horn back into place to get this custom back on track. When creating customs, you always have to be prepared for things to go wrong or break. It comes with the territory of the work. Most of the time those issues can be fixed as long as you have the tools with you to do so. Luckily this time, with this break I was able to fix it, without having to delay the custom once again and replace an entire figure. With the horn glued back into place, it looks as good as new, as if it never broke, so it would be our little secret.
Keep it secret. Keep it secret.
I stated earlier that Bowser was bigger than expected, and this is evident here, as I decided to use the Grenadier body as this customs body, but just look at how comically ridiculous this looks. Bowser's head is twice the size of what I was expecting, and when paired with this body, it looks more like a bobblehead. Now if I had a few springs spare, I could probably create that, but that's not what I'm here to do. I've already had to delay this project at least twice, and I didn't want to delay again, so I was just going to have to deal with this looking, well, like this, and get on with the custom. But thankfully decided that I didn't want to cut corners, and just do what was easiest and have a final project that I wasn't happy with. After all, the look of this overly sized head just wasn't sitting right with me, or this figure to be honest. So now it's time to get
back to it.
Time for the old blubber boomer to get some limelight. I've already gone over this figure in my Gears 2 Flame Boomer custom, so I won't rehash what I've already done, he says while repeating himself many times throughout a video. But he goes through the exact same process of waterboarding, drowning, telling me where Mr. Bond isn't, Then the old sacrificing to our Lord and Saviour Peppa Pig and ripping his head off. Ah, that looks so much better and a tad bit more to scale. The head still looks oversized, but compared to the Grenadier figure, it doesn't look as bad. The previous Mario Customs heads were a little oversized too, so kinda goes with this line. Now it's time to get to painting, and turning this grey and red husk of a corpse into a vibrant yellow turtle lizard monster with an oversized head. I start off with using a yellow to cover the grey scales, mostly as a base for the skin. I'm not sure if Bowser would have scales, but seeing as how he is a giant turtle humanoid creature, I'd guess he would, so it's cool to see that kind of detail for Bowser, especially as his original body was just smooth pale yellow plastic. You may also have noticed a change in the backdrop. I'm hoping that using the black fabric backdrop will help keep the focus on the project and work, so let me know what you guys think. This yellow is very vibrant compared to Bowser's iconic pale yellow skin tone. But this is just the base layer. I don't want to have a flat skin tone for Bowser. So hopefully with what I have planned, this will work out and give me the look I'm after, but time will tell. Once the bicep and elbow has been painted, I move on to the fingers and thumb, with most of the hands covered in armour. With the first layer on the arm complete, I can show you the difference in yellows with a quick comparison. Bowser Simpson. I move on to the second arm, repeating the same process to what I've just done, making sure to get the yellow right into all the crevices of the scales. Looking kinda jaundiced at this stage. The Boomer has very little body confidence, deciding not to show off much of the torso, so it doesn't take too long to paint the back and waist yellow. Let's hope the locusts aren't into body shaming. Show those curves, Mr. Boomer. With the base layer down and dried, I use a darker shade of yellow to brush over the top of the scales, highlighting the scales and raised areas on the skin. I used a darker tone for the top layer, as I wanted to give the look of hard, rough scales on top of fresh skin underneath. Seeing as how this version of Bowser would have been in many battles, it makes sense that the top layer of scales would be a little hardened compared to the scales that aren't exposed. I dry brush all the areas that I have already painted yellow to give the same look all over. The camera doesn't pick it up as well as the naked eye, but you can see a slight difference in the skin tone. In hindsight, maybe the base yellow I used was too vibrant. I used my yellow contrast paint in the hopes to die down the vibrancy of the yellow base paint. It's not a huge issue the way it is, but I always try to have the customs as close to the correct colours as I can. I'm still new to painting and getting the right tone and shading, so even if it doesn't go to plan, it's all part of the learning curve, and I get to film my failures for you guys. How awesome. And failure it seems to be, as it didn't really tone down the yellow. I move on to the belly, which is more of a bone white kind of colour on Bowser, so I try to achieve that look here. Hopefully with a little more success than the yellow. This isn't the final look, as I do repaint this another 2 times. Earlier I mentioned that I would need to correct this imperfection on Bowser's head. It appears to be some kind of mark or stain on the side of Bowser's face. After removing this stain, I had to do a quick fix as some of the paint chipped away, but I think I managed to get the shading pretty spot on. I wanted to try something a little different with this custom. Magnets. The plan is to attach magnets to the weapons so they can stick to the back of Bowser. I'm giving Bowser the Boom Shot and Scorcher. I want the magnets to look as natural as possible on the weapons without them protruding out, so to do so I remove some small sections out of each weapon. Once that's been done, I glue the magnets into place, leaving the glue to dry. I use Gorilla Super Glue, which gives plenty of strength, so the magnets won't come loose later on. This process was a little tricky and finicky to complete, but with a bit of patience I got it to work. I did the same process for the Scorcher, and now both weapons are magnetised. Next I add more magnets to Bowser's back, so he can holster both of his power weapons. I decided to give Bowser the Boom Shot and Scorcher in reference to both the Boomer and Bowser. Bowser breathes fire and the Boomers use the Boom Shot, so giving this custom both weapons just seemed right, like the final part of a puzzle coming together. And seeing as how Bowser would be an epic boss fight if part of the Gears game, I think him having the two weapons would make for an interesting battle. I'll repeat the process on the opposite side of the back. If you were to have Locust Bowser be a boss in the game, what kind of weapons would you give him? And how would you guys have the boss fight play out? I'm interested in hearing what you guys come up with. Same as the gun, I didn't want the magnets to be too obvious on the back, so I'm hoping that replacing the bolts for the magnets won't look too out of place. I then glued down the magnets, this time using my mixing stick to hold down the magnet, learning on from when I glued the guns. You see, I do learn from past issues. Usually just takes me to repeat these errors 300 or 400 times, so yeah, leave me alone. My original concept for Bowser had him in black Ferron armour, but of course with the size of his head, the Ferron armour clearly wouldn't have worked. So seeing as how I couldn't have myself a Bowser Ferron, I decided to paint the armour black, keeping in line with the concept and what I had originally planned. And due to how dark the armour is going to be, having Bowser's skin tone be a little brighter doesn't seem too big of an issue, as it gives a bit of contrast between the two. Bowser's first appearance was in 1985 in the Super Mario Bros. Game, where he was the antagonist for Mario, a position he is held up to this day. Bowser, also known as King Koopa, is the leader of the Koopa race, who just like Bowser, all look like turtles. The Koopa Kingdom wage war and try to take over the Mushroom Kingdom and merge it with their own realm, while also taking Princess Peach as prisoner. The reasoning for kidnapping the princess changes between games and varies on Bowser's goals, using Peach to lure Mario into a trap, or in hopes to marry the princess. Although Bowser is mostly seen as the antagonist in the majority of Mario games, there are a few occasions where Bowser teams with Mario, more so in the RPG series of games, where he teams to take on a greater evil. Bowser also joins Mario in the spin-off sports and party games, being an available character to play as. In my Luigi custom video, I mentioned that Luigi was my main for Mario Kart. Whereas this is true, I do sometimes switch out for Bowser, more so Bowser Bones in Mario Kart 8 on the Switch. I always find it amusing having a big ass evil turtle riding a tiny bike, kinda like that bear in Madagascar 3. Bowser is even a playable character in the Skylander series, although he goes by the name Hammer Slammer Bowser. He also has an appearance in the 2012 animated film Wreck-It Ralph, where the villains are attending the Bad Anon meeting. Bowser has a son, Bowser Jr., who helps kidnap the princess. I'll have to keep an eye out for him and see if I can turn him into a Ferron, assuming that he won't have a huge ass head like his papa. I always enjoy a good villain, and Bowser is one of the few gaming villains that has managed to stand the test of time, even after the many defeats he suffers. Bowser is often ranked highly when it comes to video game antagonists. Bowser was placed second out of 100 for Best Video Game Antagonist by IGN. In the 2013 gaming edition of the Guinness Book of Records, Bowser started the list of the top 50 villains. So where would you guys rank Bowser in terms of gaming villains? And who would take your top spot? The black paint goes on nicely, and I only had to do a few touch-ups on areas of where the paint was applied on too thinly. I cover as much of the armour, even the black parts, as the paint I'm using is darker than the black already on the figure. This will give me an even tone throughout the customs armour. I cover the red patches on the armour too, doing repeated layers over it to cover it up, to make sure the red doesn't come through underneath. With the torso and arms painted, I move on to the lower half and start painting the legs, repeating the same technique of covering the entire lower half and making sure to get all of the dents and nicks in the armour and covering all the red. I had to go over the boots a few times just to make sure I had it all covered. The boots have a lot of different layers moulded, so making sure the paint went in between and into the crevices took a little work. But mostly just painting on thick layers and then spreading across the boot. This is exactly the look I was going for, but you know, with a Ferron instead of a Boomer. But I like this a lot more. The larger body definitely fits Bowser better. Bowser's claws are white, so it's easy enough to copy that look here, painting the Boomer's nails white. There is a line of black underneath on the outside of the nail, which looks a bit like dirt and grime stuck in the nails, which gives a nice look to the finished painting. Here's a quick brief look at how the custom would look with the armour as it is. Not too bad. As much as I wanted to keep the custom as close to the concept as possible, I didn't like the simplicity of just having black armour. And seeing as how Bowser had a lot of green on him, which I haven't yet represented in this custom, I wanted to add some green. So I decided to go over the plating in the armour with a dark green, which would keep a lot of the armour black while giving the plating itself Bowser's colours. A nice balance between keeping it how I wanted and keeping it close to Bowser's colours. I dry brushed the dark green all over the armour plating, making sure to keep the green specifically in certain areas. Mostly the areas that were red on the original Boomer. I repeat this all over the figure's torso and along the metal plating areas on the arms, shoulders and hands. I then repeat the exact same process with a lighter green, giving the armour a used and weathered look. Making sure to only cover the plating parts on the figure, basically just covering the areas I've already painted green. This is how the armour is looking so far, and I gotta admit, it looks a lot better than simply being black. The green two-tone gives a nice effect on the armour, and kinda looks a bit turtleish, if that makes sense. Probably not, but oh well. I use my steel paint to cover the metal grid parts on the armour. This is mostly just to add a bit of variety to the figure, and make those parts stand out a little more. The figure also has a lot of metal rings around the armour, which I also go over in the steel paint, returning those parts back to a metal look. I go over a few buckles too, just to add that little extra detail. The back has a few grid plates, which I cover too. Again, to add a little bit of extra detail to break up the mostly black armour. With very little paint left on the brush, I give the belt across the waist a bit of dry brushing to give a look of worn metal. So far this is how the custom is looking, and the further we go the better it starts to look. The look of the armour is something I'm very happy with how it turned out. A nice balance. Now that I'm happy with the paint, I give that final touch, and my favourite part of painting, adding the detailing and armour scratches on the figure. Again, with the entire Mario line, I want to give these figures a look of hardened fighters. They aren't fresh off the line. These guys have fought and suffered in battle, and their armour is used to represent this. And adding little bits of steel paint to the edges and raised areas really helps rein this look in. I do this all over the armour on raised edges and really focus on areas I think would naturally get worn and scratched. With those final details added, this is how the figure is looking so far. I'm really happy with the custom and how it's looking. With the paint finished, it's time to attach the head. Before permanently placing it into place, I do a quick measure and look to make sure I don't attach the head at an angle. I put glue on both Bowser's head and onto the figure, on where the head attaches, just to give it the strength to stay put. The head is attached and still looks a little silly, but as you can see there is a bit of a gap, but I have a plan to fix this. Using the green stuff, I'll create Bowser's spiked collar to help hold the head in place and cover the gap. I tear off a small amount of modelling clay, mix it together until it turns green. Like so. I then roll out little tiny sausages and place them into Bowser's neck, and using some tools I help mould and guide the clay into position. I do this right around the neck and then add spikes. I left the clay to dry for 48 hours. 24 hours is usually enough time for the clay to dry, but giving it an extra day wasn't going to hurt. I paint the choker or collar black, making sure I don't get any black on the spikes, as it would take a lot to cover with white paint. I cover the entire collar black. Bowser has these spike collars all over his arms, and I was going to add them, but then I thought in doing so would impede some articulation movement in the arms, so decided against it. I don't think it needs them, the collar around the neck is enough. What do you guys think? This is how the collar is looking. Next up is the spikes. I paint the spikes white, and these took a few layers to get a decent coverage. And this is how the finished project looks. It's not perfect, I've only ever moulded twice before this, but it looks decent enough. And any imperfections I can play off as damage from battle. Now the weapons. Thank you for joining me and watching how I created this custom. After many delays, I'm so glad to finally have gotten Bowser finished, so I can show him off with my other Mario Gears crossover customs. And again, if you want to see those photos, then join me on the old socials. Instagram for the youth and Facebook for us old folks. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with all the delayed content. Thank you once again, and as always, stay safe.